All right, hi everyone. We are starting a new series called Lunch and Learn: Level Up Your Career, and this is just a series meant for us to have a place to talk about professional, aspects of the business world, professionalism, all that good stuff. Everything from building the effective resume to how to interview properly. Just a space where we can share these tips and tricks from some of our brothers and others in the field. So. Today, Mackenzie and I are joined by Chase Simpson. And Chase, would love for you to just give an intro on yourself and, how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. So hello, everyone. Chase Simpson, Zeta Theta 1152 from the University of Memphis. Um, yeah, I think my role today, and I'll kind of just talk a little bit about that and kind of maybe how I led into this point. So I currently am the Senior Director of Global Early Careers for the Coca-Cola Company. So hopefully I don't have to explain what the Coca-Cola Company does. But in my role as the Senior Director of Global Early Careers, I get the opportunity to really think about our role as an organization and how we're bringing in early talent. That can be through internships, co-ops, management trainee programs. The list is really long of the types of kind of programs and opportunities that are at play for individuals who want to start a career at a company like the Coca-Cola Company.
Mhm.
So fortunately, I worked at the Office of Administration when I graduated from the University of Memphis for 2 years. And that kind of kick-started maybe my, what I'll call is like a little bit of working with collegians, and that kind of started that path for me. So after I left Lambda Chi, I spent a couple of years in the nonprofit space working with college students on fundraising opportunities. I left there and got a great chance to go work for a Big Four accounting and consulting firm where I did campus recruiting. So got to primarily focus on our accounting students for Big Four accounting and consulting. That led me to a tech company, which at the time was doing very well in the height of COVID. And so I was working for a video platform company that many people used. And so got to work on hiring a lot of our tech talent and early tech talent there,
Mhm.
which is then what led me to the opportunity here. And so it's been really unique, right? Like I've had so many different kind of jobs and roles, but then also industries. So when you think about all the different kind of industries that I've been in, it's been nonprofit, there's been healthcare nonprofit, there's been the fraternity itself, there's been a tech company, a Big Four accounting and consulting firm, now a
Mhm.
CPG company. And so it's been really unique to kind of get to this place. But I think what I always go back to is when I was graduating college, I was like, I have to know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And I've got to pick a career that's going to be everything. And
Right.
I think what I've kind of deduced back down to is it's really that you're just making the next step. You take the skills
Mhm.
and capabilities that you gain in the role that you're in today, and then you make the next step. And it may lead you to somewhere that's unfamiliar, but you use those skills and capabilities that you have to kind of get to that next place. So I feel very fortunate to be in the role that I'm in today and working for a brand like the Coca-Cola Company.
Mhm.
But it really is, I think, just the skills and capabilities that I built from not only university, but then each of the jobs that I had that have allowed me to kind of get to this place.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that background.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure in your many roles and your current roles that you've seen and written a ton of resumes. So, with that, for an effective resume, what are your top three must-haves?
Ooh, it's a great question, and I think it's one that, and I'll just preface this by saying I have read and obviously reviewed a ton of resumes.
Mhm.
I'm still a human, right? So I don't think that just from the words of Chase Simpson that it makes it the absolute fact and has to be what every resume is like. I think there's industries out there that look for certain things. There's other individuals and recruiters that, look for other aspects that they think are important. So I want to make sure I preface first by saying that of this is just the holy grail of what Chase Simpson believes, but not necessarily what every recruiter and what every person might think out there. But, I think number one and the biggest must for me is that when you're thinking about the bullet points within your jobs or your education experience or projects or any of those things, quite often most people just describe the type of work, right? So it's almost like they take the job description of the job and just put it into bullet forms. And that's essentially how they think it's descriptive enough to a recruiter to understand what they did.
Mm-hmm.
But I always talk about, well, you have to remember that you are a piece of paper on a resume. So how do you make sure that you're standing out amongst all the pieces of paper that a recruiter is going to read? And I might have 4 people that are listed as, we'll call it a secretary, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I might be looking for a senior secretary, if we want to say it that way. Well, how do I look across the 4 people that are currently secretaries to say which one is going to be the best for this role? I need to know what impact you had in the job that you're in. And so your bullets really need to be descriptive around what impact you made
Mm-hmm.
in the role, or what role you played in a project, right? Because many folks are looking for team players and things of that sort. So what impact did you make? And so making sure your bullets across all of your different examples, if you will, in your resume are super descriptive to the point to say, this is the impact I made. So that could include, there was a 10% increase in effectiveness or efficiencies or whatever the case may be, but really getting fine tuned on what is the impact you made within the bullets. The second thing I would just say is, and this might be a hot take, but you don't necessarily have to have an objective statement.
Mm.
For me, like, you are applying to this internship or this job. I know your objective is to get said job or to get said internship. So I always am like, there can be an opportunity to, instead of having an objective, maybe it's a good chance to take a look at your resume itself. You can use ChatGPT in the same way of copying, pasting your resume, and put it into ChatGPT and say, write a quick summary that summarizes my experience overall.
Mm-hmm.
And you can put that at the top, right? So underneath your name, maybe it's a good chance. So instead of an objective statement, maybe you're really thinking about, how can I put a couple sentences that are super impactful about the work and the impact that I've created that make me the best candidate for this role? And so, because sometimes, right, like a recruiter is going to start from the top and work their way down. And if they can quickly read in that summary, like something that catches their eye, that might be an automatic, like, ooh, I want to talk to this person because
Mm-hmm.
that sounds really engaging or interesting, or it sounds like it applies to the role. And then the last thing I think is, I always say this, like, and it's not necessarily what I have to see in a resume per se, but I think it's a resume tip that I learned back very young that I've kind of kept. I have a Word document that is literally everything from back when I applied to Lambda Chi in 2010 all the way until now, which is 2025, which is terrifying to say, but 15 years later, that has all of those experiences. And oftentimes I create more than, there's almost 10 or 15 bullets under each job to
Mm-hmm.
show the different impact that I've made. Because your resume really should be a plug and play on your, like, the most applicable skills and capabilities for the job you're looking for, and why you, again, would be the best candidate. And so often I think we just copy and paste a resume over and apply to 85 jobs and think that that's
Mm-hmm.
somehow going to land us the best role. And I think as I've gotten kind of through my career and as I've read more and more resumes, I just know, I'm like, there's always the handful of candidates to me that have taken the time that I'm like, dang, they're really strong. And they like they have basically taken the job description and made their resume almost sound as like they are the best candidate for this role.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always those that I'm like, how do I spend a little bit more time with them? Or how do I spend a bit more time on their resume reviewing them to maybe put them forward in front of a manager to think about interviewing or hiring the candidate? So those are kind of my 3 things. I know that those are probably a bit broad, but number 1 is, like, by all, like, the most important thing for me. If I take one look at the bullets and I'm like, this is just basically copy paste a job description, I'm not interested. And then
Yeah.
I move on, because likely if I'm reviewing 150 candidates, I can find 10, 15 that have taken the time to really think about, this is the impact I had in the last role, and this is why I would be a good candidate for your role that I'm applying to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's something that, I've learned too over the years is really how do you show your impact in the roles that you've been in?
Yeah,
And I've been told many times, like, use numbers, numbers are
yeah,
going to,
absolutely.
share the facts of what you've done. So instead of saying, like, I manage social media like Mackenzie does, she could
Yeah, yeah,
say, I engaged with X amount of people, X amount of accounts
totally.
and
Yeah.
grew it, this percentage. And like that's so much more effective.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people out there too that, especially university students who, hey, like my focus has been on academics. I don't necessarily
Mhm.
have a ton of internship experience, or I'm trying to land my first internship, or I don't have a ton of work experience to kind of put out there. And I think that's always where I go back to that same point, Taylor, of like, it's okay to not necessarily have all the work experience, but what things have you done? What
Right.
projects have you been in? What impact did that make on a group? Like, how did you manage people within a group project? Like, there's tons of ways to articulate the
Yes.
impact that you've made by bringing in some of those numbers, like you mentioned. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean you have to have 10 years of experience to be able to do that. And
Right.
I think sometimes people kind of, even I think, Mackenzie, you were kind of saying like, sometimes there's even this fear of like, I'd have no experience. So I just don't even know where to start on my resume. And
Right.
I'm like, there is always a place to start, because likely you have even been in a classroom, you've worked in a group project, you likely have done something extracurricular. So how do you take those things
Mhm.
and build out that resume to really showcase your skills and capabilities? And I think sometimes that's a little bit of like, most people I talk to, they're like, I have no experience. I'm not going to get hired because I have no previous experience. And I can tell you right now, even from my experience here at Coke, there was an intern who was a freshman who like had no previous work experience, but like had a killer resume just of like group projects, like things they volunteered with, were able to like really articulate that. And they came in the interview and just like brought to life like what role they played on the team. And I think everyone was like, we have to hire that person. And
Mhm.
I'm sure there was like plenty of people who had really great skills and capabilities and great resumes, but that candidate really stood out because they took the time to really articulate some of those things.
Gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. And final thing I'll say on that point is,
Sure.
just putting in the effort too. I see a lot of times on LinkedIn people saying like, "Oh, I applied for 200 jobs." And it's like, "Well, is that really the best use of your time, or is it, like you were saying, kind of perfecting a few resume or a few applications with your resume and really kind of tailoring it towards the things that you really want to apply for?" So
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
that's super important to remember too. So kind of moving into maybe some misconceptions about resumes. So, Chase, do you have any misconceptions that you have about resumes? So, like, do I still need to put my address on my resume? Do I still need my GPA? That kind of stuff that, might be a little bit outdated, but, something that will help that resume really stand out.
Yeah. Probably, I think probably first and foremost would be what I said in the last question, which is just
Yeah.
about an objective statement. I think that
Mhm.
there's always a school of thought that you still need to have that on there.
Hmm.
And I think for me, it's the space on the resume, like it can be better used.
Right.
So for me, it's not important, right? And I think that is a common misconception. I think, to your point, the question about like, do I need to have my address on there? And, I, again, some of those things, I think when you go to actually apply for a job, quite often you have to fill in your name, you have to fill in your
Mhm.
address, you have to do those things. So sometimes I think it's a bit of like, and that becomes very personal information. You could be
Right.
applying for a job that, I always say like there's so many different circumstances. Like you may be trying to move to Atlanta to
Mhm.
come and post graduation, you have family that lives here and you're trying to move to Atlanta. And if you have an Indianapolis address, I may be thinking, well, I'm not providing relocation. My job is
Mhm.
based here in Atlanta. Like, you don't qualify for the job because the job is based here in
Yes.
Atlanta. And so, I think that there's just some duplicative things, right? Of like, I don't think you need your address there. I think making sure that, as your GPA is always something that's going to come up. I think for many companies, it is still a huge part of their
Mhm.
hiring practice. So, I always say, like, refer a bit back to the job description itself. The job description should tell you if they
Mhm.
say must currently have a 3.5 GPA or higher,
Right.
then you should be thinking like, oh, I need to make sure they know. And if they don't have me submitting transcripts, how else do I let them know but through the resume that I have a 3.8 GPA?
Right.
So I always say, like, it's a bit of that, hey, here's the like job description.
Mhm.
Here is my resume. What things are on here that say requirements? And how do I make sure that my like resume is speaking to that? Obviously, it has to be fact, but how
Mhm.
do I make sure that it's speaking to that? So I don't know if it's misconceptions. I would say no address, like I think GPA has to be on there, especially if the job description is looking for it. Again, most companies will tell you exactly what they're looking for. Um, I think the other thing would be just for like full-time opportunities, or now most companies are putting like remote or
Right.
location specific. So I think sometimes I've seen on a couple of resumes recently, like open to relocation, open to
Mhm.
remote or something. They kind of spell that out in some of their, whether it be in their header or in some of the other areas.
Right.
Um, which I do think is kind of important to note, because from a recruiter standpoint, there are times where, again, if you lived in Indianapolis and I am based here in Atlanta and looking for someone that's open to relocation to being in Atlanta, sometimes it's in the application, but sometimes it's helpful to see that on that resume itself of like, okay, this person would be open to being in Atlanta if
Right.
that's where the job
Mhm.
location would be. So again, I don't know that I have a ton of like misconceptions per se about the
Sure.
resume. I think there is one actually that just came to mind. Many people say like your resume needs to be one page. I think I would say for most folks that are early in their career, you don't have enough
Mhm.
transparently where your resume should be more than one. Like I think especially if you're applying to one of your first full-time jobs, an internship, or maybe it's even your second full-time job, like you've had one for a couple years and you're maybe 3 years out from college. Like I still don't believe that you have enough that would validate needing more than one page to showcase your impact. Like I think you can pick and choose the right things to have a one page resume that's super impactful. I think as you get into your career, like obviously I'm 15 years into my career, there probably could be enough to where I could have a 2 page resume. But
Mhm.
I think the other part sometimes is recruiters are not going to spend a ton of time. So if
Right.
you have a 2 page, it's likely if it's not engaging enough on the first page, they're definitely not getting to page two.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So if it is super engaging on page one, cool. Maybe it makes them flip the page and see page two, and maybe that intrigues their interest a bit more. But sometimes I like to say like the one page, make it super powerful
Yeah.
that makes them want to talk more. And then you give the chance to even talk about things when you have a live conversation of some of the things that may not be on your resume,
Mhm.
Mhm.
or some of the things that maybe they didn't get to see in the one page that you're like, I want to highlight this for you. It's not in my resume, but I do think it could be really important
Right.
for you to
Yeah.
know. This is one of the experiences I was able to get. So I think that's sometimes a misconception of like your resume or
Mhm.
your resume has to be one page. It can be more than one page, but I do think about the like most powerful way to showcase yourself. And if you think it's through 2 pages, great. If it's only through one, I think that that's just as awesome too, because many recruiters are
Mhm.
likely going to get to one page again until you get further and further in your career and you're creating like
Mhm.
multiple page
Right.
CVs and resumes because you're applying for some vice president role at that point. Maybe you need more than one page to be able to
Mhm.
showcase those skills and capabilities.
Fair.
Gotcha. Yeah, so on to what I think is the harder part of a job application, the cover letter. So what are the best practices of that? Like, how do you start? What do you include? All about our little cover letter.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic, and I think it's probably again one of the ones that I think is you could talk to many recruiters, and they'll have differing opinions about what a cover letter should look like, what it should include. Um, for me, when I first started out applying to jobs, like I simply went to Google and was like, help me with a template for a cover letter, right?
Yes.
Like, and I quite frankly, like I kept that template for many, many years. Like
Mhm.
it has kind of been a guide for me throughout the years. So first, I would just say, like, don't be afraid to use the resources that are available to you to help you create that cover letter. I think, again, sometimes it can feel like I need to say exactly the right thing in order to like get noticed. I think, in my opinion, again, this is a Chase Simpson opinion, nothing to do with my work and nothing to do with everybody's perspective, but I honestly would spend more time on your resume to make sure that that is what's going to be it. Like, it's less likely that I think a cover letter gets passed on to the actual manager who is hiring. And a recruiter may read the cover letter and be like, okay, this candidate sounds really good. Let me read their resume. Okay. And typically the hiring manager would then just get the resume and interview on the resume, right? Like,
Yes.
I don't think many folks are interviewing based on the cover letter. Can it help you get to the interview? Absolutely. So I think if you're spinning your wheels, spend more time on your resume first. Then I think for the cover letter, use the resources that are available to you to help you get a template and kind of a format that feels good for you. The thing about it is there's so many, formats out there. There's so many templates out there. But I remember, like, kind of as I've gone through the years, some of them didn't feel kind of authentic to me. Like, I was like, that's not how I would like format that, or I wouldn't put bullet points like in a normal like email that I was writing. Like, even if I was thinking about like if my cover letter was an email to the person that I'm interested in applying or interviewing with, like I may not put bullet points. I may rather actually explain this in a paragraph form. So I think you also have to make sure that it's like authentic to you and how you speak and how you actually talk. Like, I don't think it has to be super like, or madam, like, and those are some of the older probably versions where I think it's ultimately like, how do you give a summary of your skills and capabilities from your resume that's in a short enough form? And then how do you take what's in the job description and what the company kind of stands for? So their values, what they do, how do you combine all three of those things to put into a letter form that says, I think you should interview me, without saying, I think you should interview me, but it's basically taking like, this is what the company stands for, and this is what the company is trying to do. This is what the role is. This is the job description. This is why I believe they have this role that relates to the company. And this is what I believe I bring to the table and why you should want to interview me. It's basically taking those three categories and putting them into a letter form and really, really highlighting that. And again, you can do that in your own unique way. And that again pulls in your own kind of unique, authentic pieces to the actual cover letter. But I think of it in those three aspects. Who is the company? What do they stand for? What are they trying to achieve? You can do that by going to any company's website and kind of figuring out who they are as a company, what they do. Then you read the job description, understand a little bit more about the role itself and why you think that they would be looking for someone to fill that role. And then it's a bit of that, here's how I think I bring all these skills and capabilities to life and why you should want to interview me. So again, cover letters you have to make them unique in the same way for your resume for every job that you're applying to.
Yes.
I had to summarize all of this. I would say, though, spend more time on your resume to make sure that that is like in the best way, putting your best foot forward. Use tools and resources that are available to you that you can work to work on creating the best like cover letter.
Yeah.
Again, I just think of my personal opinion, like the hiring manager is not like interviewing you based on the cover letter. They're interviewing you based on your resume. So really, really focus on that. And again, that's a personal Chase thing. I know we have to submit them. Every company has them as a part of the application process. And it feels super daunting, Mackenzie, like you said, like, how do I make sure the format's right? How do I make sure I'm saying the right thing? Because this is kind of the first impression. But I think really just think of it as like, I'm writing a more extensive email that includes about the company, that includes about the role and why I would be the best person for it. And if you can take and really just simplify it to those 3 things, I think your cover letter will be fine enough to be reviewed. But if your resume is super, super powerful, like that is the best thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And as speaking as someone who has like hired people, that
Yeah.
is so true, Chase. Like I just look at the resume. Like if they have a cover letter, I might skim over and be like, oh, that's nice. But
Yeah.
really it's the resume that draws me in, you know,
Yeah.
and determines who I want to interview.
Yeah. And
So
there's in kind of like I mean, I remember I sat on a panel probably a couple of years back. So not in my current role, but in another role. And there was a bit of a debate of like, how much time do you spend on cover letters? And one of the recruiters in the room was like, I read every single one, and that determines whether or not I go to the resume. And then there was like me on the other end that was like, I skimmed through it and like, make sure that people have it because it is a part of our like required part of the application. So I make sure that people have it. And quite frankly, what I would do previously was like make sure that they actually listed our company, like, because you would be surprised about how many people just like copy and pasted the same cover letter and it was like the incorrect company. And I'm like, all right, well, if you can't even take the time to like make those small edits, then I'm not going to waste my time interviewing you. But there was kind of that debate to your point of like, there are some people out there, and I think there are probably still many people out there who read extensively every single line, and that determines whether or not they go to the resume. And there are probably others of us that I would say like there's been a bit of evolution even in my own career of reading every single resume and cover letter to now I focus primarily on the resume because that's I know when I go to a hiring manager and I say, like, these are the reasons why I think we need to move forward with these candidates for a next round interview. They're going to want me to pull stuff from both the resume and from a phone screen that indicates why they're the strongest fit for the role that we're hiring for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like with the cover letter too, just what you said, like those 3 buckets, I think is super helpful. And you know, tailoring it again to each application that you're doing, but using those 3 buckets and you know your Google and AI tools to help you out, I think makes it less daunting for sure.
Wow. And I mean, I'm like, if you take your resume and you really do like work to better summarize it in a way, like that is true to you. That should be true to the work that you've done and the impact that you've made. And so, again, there are tools and resources out there that can really help you from a formatting perspective and just getting it looking its best. You know what I think, quite frankly, Taylor, is most people just don't take the extra minute to do those things, right? Like, again, it's kind of back to the same thing of like people will copy and paste the same cover letter from company to company. It's like, this isn't even the same company. So just like take the extra minute to even just make the small edits that you need to make and submit that you need to. So, yeah, that would be my biggest takeaway from this is just take the extra minute to do those little small fine-tuned things because that's really can be what makes the difference.
100%. Yeah. And so talking about, you know, those extra things that are, you know, additional to your application, talking about portfolios. So, you know, like I have a portfolio, I'm sure Mackenzie has a portfolio. Who in your mind needs a portfolio and, you know, what does that kind of look like in the application process?
Sure. Yeah, I think it can kind of depend, right? So, and I think portfolio, you probably could also add like a project portfolio. Like there's kind of some different companies that use different terms. And when I was in the tech space, when I was recruiting for product developers and software engineers and software developers, everybody had a GitHub link, which it took you to a website which showcased all of their like software development work and all of their different projects from courses. You know, I think the one biggest piece is depending on the application process, like if there's a separate part to like upload different documents, right? Like it may be like, here's a section to upload your cover letter. Here's a section to upload your resume. Other documents to upload. That's a great place to really, especially work that you want highlighted that relates to the role that you're applying for. that's where I think you can pull some of those things from your portfolio to do that. If it's in a, like you have it in a separate website, just make sure that it's like a clickable link from your resume.
Right.
Same thing for your LinkedIn. If you want to highlight your LinkedIn profile on a resume, which I think is a great way to do so, especially if your like LinkedIn is up to date and you do regular updates to that. But if you have a portfolio that has an actual hyperlink that can take a like recruiter or a hiring manager to be able to showcase your work, that is super, super important, because I think that that's something that don't make them like, don't try to put it in hidden spots where they have to try to find it. If you want to highlight that work and you have one, put it at the top with your header so they can click on it and it can take them to your personal website, your portfolio. Every job is a bit different, right? If you're in a more, what I'll call like creative design, those kinds of things, you typically would have a portfolio to showcase the work that you've been able to do. If you're in something that's more tech focused, where you're really trying to showcase your skills and capabilities in engineering, code writing, things of that sort, you typically have a project website to be able to do that. So I think pending what your major is and kind of your area of focus, I think if you have like projects that can link back to showcase your work, then you should make the effort to actually create either a personal website or put it in your LinkedIn profile, whatever you want to do that really, so people can actually go to it. I think that sometimes it's like, if it's just you did something in the classroom and like I did a group project and we all worked together and did research and then did a presentation, obviously like you don't have the link to like take them to that presentation, and I don't think you need to do that. But if you're like, this is work I did either outside of the classroom, I did it as a capstone project, these are the ways that I want to showcase really what like the full depth and breadth of my work, and have that either portfolio, have that separate website, whatever the case may be, so they can actually go in and see that. So, because I do think that when I was in the tech space and we were kind of, most of the time when I saw projects and people were like, I developed an app, I was like, great. I don't know how I'm supposed to even see what this app is. And so it was the candidates that always had a link to the app or to the project where they worked on that, where I could go in and actually see like really cool and applicable to what we do here. Cool. I think that we need to talk to them more. So I don't know that I have specific disciplines per se that need it, because I do think it really depends. But I just think that that's an extension of the work that you were doing that basically says like, here's the resume. No matter if you're in the creative landscape and you have a little more, what I'll say is like a different type of resume, like there are very standard resumes, but then some people like to get creative, and I'm like totally for that, as long as all of the information is backed up there and it's easy to read to a recruiter. And then if you have a portfolio, make sure it's linked in that resume so then someone can go and access it, and is able to kind of see all the type of work that you've done that's kind of in your resume itself. So again, I don't know specific disciplines, but really if you have the work and you're able to show like, this is either what I did in my free time outside of the classroom in a club or organization, or it was like a specific capstone project that I had to do and I'm able to showcase that work, then that's when you want to be able to kind of draw attention to it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. So before we kind of wrap up and everything, I would love for Mackenzie, as you know, a recent grad, you know, she's been working for a year and a half now, to share any words of wisdom, you know, with anyone watching about, you know, maybe something that you did that you found helpful in your resume or cover letter, or just in your job search in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually got some advice whenever I was applying for jobs with, it was from my mom. I had a spreadsheet of all the jobs that I applied for, when I applied for them, and then like different columns for, oh, did they respond? Did I not hear a response? Did I follow up with it? Did I get an interview? And it was just great, like, to keep track. Because at one point I hadn't started that, and I was like, I don't even know what I applied for. So I just think that's a good tool to use, so then you know what you applied for when you applied, especially if there's like a date that the application is closing, you'll kind of know about when like maybe you'll hear something and you'll look back. That was like the biggest thing for me. I will say all of Chase's thoughts were super interesting to me because I was the one person who would just use my cover letter. I would change the company's names, maybe change a few things on it, but and not even like including, I would say, the impact that I had at a certain place. Like that is just super important information.
Mhm.
Knowing now, like including the numbers, including the things that I did, but how I impacted the organization, I think is super helpful right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah, I think just to your point, it's such a like keeping that tracker is really helpful of just like where you've applied, who even if you were to get a contact, because I think I always say like sometimes especially junior and senior year when you're kind of in that like internship and full-time job search, like it can get really overwhelming because you're kind of like throwing sometimes like people are throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? And you're kind
Right.
of like all of these kind of sound interesting and I could go in a number of different ways based on my major and there's a number of different companies that interest me and it's sometimes it's again taking that moment because you could be emailing a recruiter from this company and then I send you an email from Coca-Cola and then you respond and you call me the name and the company that you had been talking to
Yes.
previously, right? And so sometimes it's like, wait, who from what company? So if you have that tracker, I think is super great advice for those that are kind of like entering the job search, especially at a time now where there's handshake, which many schools have, and there's the ability to go on and see, and companies are throwing their jobs in there. But
Mhm.
I've seen it from a student perspective, and I'm like, I don't even know where to start. Like, there's jobs everywhere, and everything says it's a match for me. And I'm like, how do you then really keep track of all the information that you're putting out there from an application standpoint, and then all the things that you and all the people you might be meeting? One of
Yeah.
the things I'll just add, just as like a tidbit that I learned fairly young in my career, that I think is also an important part of how you build your network.
Mhm.
One of the things that someone taught me was, hey, you can connect with, if we had a one-on-one. So after this call, if Mackenzie, you connected with me on LinkedIn, if you were job searching, which you're not anymore, but if you were, right, many people typically in the conversation to say, if you think of anyone or any company that might be interested in me, like, please think of me.
Mm.
I have a full-time job. I've got many other things. I've got many competing priorities that are competing
Yeah.
for my attention. I'm probably not going to think immediately of Mackenzie when someone mentions a job or when there might be a job opening at another company. Like I may not do that. So sometimes it's a bit on you as the candidate to go through my LinkedIn and say, hey,
Yes.
actually, some people at Lambda Chi. Like, I just applied for a job. Would you be willing to introduce me to? I see
Mhm.
that or Taylor. I see
Mhm.
that Justin Fisher. Like, I see these people. Would you be willing to make introductions to
Mhm.
see if I could have like a coffee chat with them to just better understand what it's like working there?
Yes.
And being like that kind of intentional, because oftentimes I think people are like, oh, well, we had the chat and it was a great chat, but like the network didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything for me. And so I think it's always a bit of like, think about it from the aspect of, okay, now I've made this connection. How do I
Mhm.
then dig deeper into their network to really think about where I go next? And
Yes.
that's kind of the way you start to navigate that. Because again, there's also people in my network that I may have met once at a conference and we haven't necessarily connected since then, but it doesn't mean I couldn't reach out to them, but they're
Mhm.
not top of mind for me to reach out to. So if
Right.
you came and said specifically like, hey, it was great to chat with you. I looked at your LinkedIn and I see these three people that I would really like you to connect me with. Would you be willing to do that? I'd be like, oh, absolutely. Like it takes the work off of me to think about how do I plug Mackenzie into my network. And
Yes.
you've actually done the work for me. And all I have to do is send an email. Easy peasy, happy to do that.
Right.
And I think some of that like can really help too when you're thinking about, okay, now I have this spreadsheet of all the jobs I applied to, but also here's all the people that I've connected with that might have connections at companies that I've applied to.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, are there any final thoughts that you have or advice for anybody entering the workforce right now?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll just say is I always say like it's daunting to kind of like think about your career and think about what is that going to look like for the rest of my life. And I think we've gotten to this place now, hopefully, where people can kind of say, I want to go into a job, I want to make an impact, I want to gain skills and capabilities. That might mean you stay with the same company for the entirety of your career. And that's really awesome. And I think that is possible. It also might be possible for you to make the decision on where you go and say, I know I can learn something here. I know I can grow professionally, and I know I can give something to the organization. And then at some point you may be faced with, I have to make another decision. And that decision may be to go to another organization, or again, it may be to stay in the organization, but take on a different challenge and a new opportunity. But I think less of trying to think of this is my career for its entirety, unless you're going into certain disciplines, and more about how do you gain the most skills and capabilities that make you the most, like, I always just say, like, how does it make you the most and best and most sought after employee across any company? Like, I always am like, shouldn't that be what we are trying to do, is like gain skills and capabilities where people are like, I have to have Taylor on my team, whether it be internally or even from another company. Like, you want to be desired and then in that attraction state. So I always think of it in that way, like, take a scale back of like, this doesn't have to be what you do for the rest of your life. It can be what you do for a couple of years, and that's great. And the company can be a company that you're with for a year or two or a couple of years, or for your entire career. And those are both things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think just try not to be and get so overwhelmed with the amount of like, oh my gosh, I have to make the best decision and the decision that's going to be with me for the rest of my life, when every decision after college from a work perspective is a learning experience regardless.
Yes.
I've had great opportunities, and I've had opportunities that have just been huge learnings for me. And those learnings are still what got me to where I am today, both good and maybe some really hard learnings. Both of them got me to where I am today. So you have to take some risk and you have to take some tough steps in order to get there, but it doesn't have to be the be all end all of what you choose immediately following college or even 2 years after. Everything is just the next step to get you where do you want to be eventually.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's awesome. Good stuff. Well, Chase, thank you so much for sitting down with us and just kind of walking us through these hopefully not as daunting things anymore after this. And so we'll be doing a lot of these. So, if there's any specific topic you want us to talk about, let us know. And yeah, we're just really fortunate to have, your expertise and your opinions. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank y'all. And I'll just say, like, for anyone that's out there, like, I'm always willing to review a resume, give tidbits. Like, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and feel free to message me, and we can kind of go from there. But I always offer that up because it's one of those things where obviously I do it for my profession, but sometimes just having someone take 5 minutes to look it over and give you some just gut reaction feedback can be super helpful. So happy to lend my services in that way and help out in any way possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Chase. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you all.